A kind-hearted but struggling student takes a job as a live-in nanny for the two young unruly children of a notoriously demanding workaholic billionaire widower who isolates himself and his family in a vast, lonely mansion. She just wants to help the kids, but finds herself drawn to the broken man beneath the cold exterior, until she discovers why he pushes everyone away, a secret tied to his late wife's death. Will Abby reach the hearts of these broken children and their guarded father? Hit like if you're ready for this emotional journey and subscribe for more stories that tug at the heartstrings. Now, let's step into the imposing world of Blackwood Manor. The stale smell of burnt coffee and disinfectant hung in the air of the campus cafe, a scent Abigail Abby Hayes associated with exhaustion and minimum wage. Wiping down a sticky table for the 10th time that hour, she forced a smile for a group of boisterous fraternity brothers who left crumpled napkins and barely $1 in tips. Her apron pockets felt depressingly light. It was already noon, and she still had a 4-hour shift shelving books at the library later, followed by hours of trying to decipher dense child psychology theories for Professor Albright's class. And somewhere, in the terrifying space between shifts and studying, she needed to find several $1,000s before her university tuition deadline passed and her carefully constructed future imploded. At 22, Abby felt perpetually adrift, in a sea of financial worry. Her scholarship to the prestigious private university near Boston covered tuition, thankfully, but the exorbitant fees, books, and basic living costs were a constant struggle. Her dream of becoming a child therapist, inspired by her late mother's kindness as a kindergarten teacher, felt increasingly fragile. Rent on the cramped off-campus apartment she shared was due, her laptop was threatening to die, and the specter of possibly having to drop out, even temporarily, loomed large and suffocating. Later that night, hunched over her ailing laptop in the quiet sanctuary of the university library, the red glow of the overdue tuition balance on the student portal seemed to mock her efforts. She scrolled numbly through generic job boards, retail, food service, data entry, the pay rates depressingly uniform, none offering the miracle she needed. Discouragement settled heavily in her chest. Maybe she should just take a semester off, try to save up. But the thought felt like admitting defeat. Then, almost hidden on a niche website specializing in high-end domestic staffing, a site she'd stumbled upon during a desperate late-night search, a stark listing jumped out. Live-in nanny governess sought for 2 young children, ages 5 and 7, residing in secluded private estate outside Boston. Demanding position requiring exceptional patience, discretion, adaptability, and emotional resilience. Previous occupants found role unsuitable. Excellent compensation package including private quarters, board, and highly competitive salary commensurate with qualifications. Ironclad confidentiality agreement required. Background check mandatory, serious inquiries only. Previous occupants found role unsuitable. That line sent a small shiver down her spine. Secluded estate, demanding. It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel. Abby almost clicked away, certain she lacked the qualifications for such a role, but the mention of young children, combined with the tantalizing phrase highly competitive salary, made her pause. What if, just what if, this was the lifeline she needed? Driven by a potent mix of desperation and a genuine affinity for children in need, she took a deep breath and filled out the brief online application. She listed her babysitting experience, her volunteer hours at a local community center's after-school program, highlighted relevant psychology coursework, and poured her heart into the short statement about her childcare philosophy, emphasizing patience, empathy, creating secure attachments, and fostering emotional expression through play. She hit submit with minimal hope, feeling like she'd just applied to be an astronaut. The email reply arrived the next morning, startlingly prompt. It wasn't from a parent, but from a Mrs. Eleanor Davenport, estate manager, Blackwood Manor. The tone was formal, precise, almost intimidating. It requested an immediate video interview slot later that same day. The interview felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. Mrs. Davenport appeared on screen exactly as Abby might have pictured an estate manager from a movie. Steel grey hair pulled back in an immaculate severe bun, sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue every flicker of expression, and a voice utterly devoid of warmth or pleasantry. She bypassed typical nanny questions about favourite games or handling picky eaters. Instead, her queries were laser-focused. Describe your strategy for managing persistent oppositional behaviour. How do you maintain professional boundaries in an isolated live-in environment? Provide an example of when you handled confidential information with absolute discretion. Mr. Blackwood values privacy above all else. Explain your understanding of operating with invisible efficiency. Abby scrambled, trying to sound confident and professional, drawing on her psychology studies and common sense, while battling a growing sense of unease. Mrs. Davenport then laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The children, Lily and Noah, lost their mother nearly 2 years ago under tragic circumstances, she stated, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. They have exhibited significant behavioral challenges since. Their father, Mr. Damien Blackwood, is CEO of Blackwood Industries. His work is demanding, and he requires a household environment that operates with maximum efficiency and minimum disruption. The previous 3 nannies, she paused, letting the number sink in, departed within weeks, citing the children's volatility and the extreme isolation of the position as untenable. Are you certain, Miss Hayes, that you possess the fortitude for such a role? 3 nannies in less than 2 years, behavioral challenges, extreme isolation, her demanding, grieving, reclusive boss. Every rational instinct screamed at Abby to politely decline. But the image of the tuition bill, combined with a powerful surge of empathy for those 2 unnamed children, pushed her forward. Maybe they weren't just being volatile. Maybe they were hurting, grieving, desperate for stability and kindness. Maybe she could be the one who didn't leave. Yes, Mrs. Davenport, Abby said, forcing conviction into her voice, meeting the older woman's piercing gaze through the screen. I understand the complexities. I believe my background in child psychology, she embellished slightly, gives me insight into their potential needs. I am patient, resilient, and my sole focus would be on providing consistent, compassionate, and structured care for Lily and Noah, while respecting Mr. Blackwood's requirements absolutely. Mrs. Davenport remained silent for a long, assessing moment. Abby held her breath. Very well, Miss Hayes, she said finally. Mr. Blackwood has reviewed your submitted profile and has authorized me, contingent on this interview, to offer you the position. She named the salary. Abby's jaw nearly dropped. It wasn't just competitive, it was astronomical, far exceeding anything she could have imagined. It was enough to cover her tuition, help with her rent backlog, and even start a small emergency fund. The offer, Mrs. Davenport continued coolly, is conditional upon passing an extensive background check, signing a comprehensive multi-page non-disclosure agreement, and successful completion of a 3-month probationary period. Private quarters, and all meals within the manor are included. A car service will collect you the day after tomorrow at noon if you accept. The speed was dizzying. The salary was life-changing. The potential downsides were terrifying. But the chance was undeniable. I accept, Mrs. Davenport, Abby heard herself say, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you for this opportunity. I promise I won't let you down. See that you don't, Miss Hayes, Mrs. Davenport replied, her tone leaving no room for error before the video call abruptly ended. 2 days later, the sleek black town car materialized outside Abby's shabby student apartment building like a spaceship landing on a suburban street. Her roommates stared, bewildered, as Abby loaded her 2 battered suitcases into the trunk, feeling like Cinderella heading to a potentially menacing ball. The drive out of Boston was a transition between worlds. Bustling city streets gave way to manicured suburbs, then to winding country roads lined with ancient stone walls and trees, ablaze with fiery autumn colors. Finally, the car slowed, turning through magnificent, imposing wrought-iron gates emblazoned, with a stark, elegant B. They glided up a long, curving driveway beneath a canopy of towering ancient oaks, the silence broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel. The trees eventually parted, revealing Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a house. It was an estate, a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of dark, weathered stone, intricate carvings, tall chimneys, and countless mullioned windows that seemed to watch her approach like dark eyes. Ivy crawled up sections of the walls, adding to the air of ancient, brooding beauty. Perfectly manicured lawns, almost unnaturally green, stretched towards formal gardens sculpted with geometric precision. The sheer scale was breathtaking, but the atmosphere was heavy, silent, almost oppressive. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress built against the world, beautiful but profoundly lonely, a shiver that had nothing to do with the crisp October air traced its way down Abby's spine. Mrs. Davenport, looking even more austere in person in her perfectly pressed charcoal suit, met her at the massive, carved oak front door. The cavernous entrance hall echoed with their footsteps on the polished marble floor. Priceless-looking antiques stood like silent sentinels in shadowed alcoves. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Miss Hayes," the estate manager greeted her formally. "Your presence should be as unobtrusive as possible. Staff quarters are in the west wing. Yours are adjacent to the nursery suite for convenience. The children are currently engaged in their Mandarin lesson. You will be formally introduced at precisely 4 o'clock in the playroom." Abby's assigned room, while technically in the staff area, was larger and more luxuriously appointed than any place she'd ever lived. Heavy damask curtains, a carved four-poster bed, antique furniture, a sparkling ensuite bathroom. But the silence was absolute, the air still. A thick binder lay on the antique writing desk, the infamous household protocols. Abby spent the next few hours poring over it. Detailed schedules for the children, complex dietary restrictions. Lily was apparently lactose intolerant, Noah allergic to nuts, lists of approved activities, strict rules about noise levels, visitor policies, none allowed without prior written approval from Mrs. Davenport, and an entire section dedicated to respecting Mr. Blackwood's privacy, which essentially boiled down to avoid visual contact, never initiate conversation, and ensure the children are kept quiet and contained when he is potentially nearby. It felt less like a home, and more like a high-security museum with very specific, demanding exhibits. At precisely 4 o'clock, feeling nervous and overdressed in the simple dress she'd chosen, Abby followed Mrs. Davenport to the designated playroom. It was another vast, beautiful room, filled with expensive-looking educational wooden toys, arranged on low shelves with unnatural neatness. Nothing looked played with. It felt sterile, staged. 2 small figures sat at a child-sized table in the center of the room, ostensibly drawing, though neither seemed engaged. Lily, the older girl, around 7 or 8, possessed her father's striking dark hair and pale complexion, but her eyes, a startlingly light grey like his, were narrowed in sullen assessment as Abby entered. She offered no greeting, simply turned her gaze back to the window with pointed indifference. Noah, the younger boy, perhaps 5 or 6, seemed tiny in the large room. He had softer brown eyes, likely his mother's, wide with what looked like perpetual anxiety. He wasn't drawing, he was just clutching a faded, well-loved stuffed bear, twisting its floppy ear with nervous energy. He didn't look up at all. "Lily." "Noah," Mrs. Davenport announced, her voice cutting through the silence. "This is Miss Hayes. She is your new nanny." Lily offered a barely perceptible shrug, continuing her window-gazing. Noah burrowed his face deeper into the worn fur of his bear, making himself smaller. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. Abby's heart went out to them instantly. These weren't simply unruly children. They were adrift, surrounded by wealth and emptiness. Taking a deep breath, Abby knelt, bringing herself down to their level, offering the warmest, most genuine smile she could muster. "Hi, Lily. Hi, Noah," she said softly, keeping her voice gentle. "I'm Abby. It's really, really nice to meet both of you." She focused on the boy. "That looks like a very important bear you have there, Noah. He looks very brave." Noah flinched at being addressed, pressing his face harder into the bear. Lily shot Abby a look sharp enough to cut glass. "His name is Captain Cuddles," she stated flatly, her voice holding a surprising amount of disdain for her age. "And Noah doesn't talk much, especially not to strangers. Or nannies," she added with pointed emphasis. "They never stay long anyway. You probably won't either." The raw hurt and cynicism in the little girl's voice hit Abby like a physical blow. They weren't just grieving, they were defensive, expecting abandonment. "Oh," Abby said, keeping her smile steady despite the sting. "Well, I'm planning on staying for a good long while, Lily. A very long while." She tried again with Noah. "Captain Cuddles looks like he gives great hugs." Silence. Abby shifted her attention back to Lily. "Maybe later. Once I'm not such a stranger. We could build an epic pillow fort right here, or I brought some books with dragons and adventures if you like those." Lily just rolled her eyes dramatically and picked up a crayon, scribbling aggressively on her paper. Noah remained hidden, a silent statue of childhood anxiety. Abby's smile faltered slightly. This was going to be a monumental challenge, requiring patience she wasn't sure she possessed. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room chilled, grew heavy. Abby felt a prickle on the back of her neck, even before she looked up. Damian Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, his presence instantly commanding the space, sucking the air out of the room. He wore another impeccably tailored dark suit, though this one seemed more relaxed, perhaps his at-home attire minus a tie. His light grey eyes swept the room, lingered briefly on his children's averted faces, then settled coolly on Abby, still kneeling awkwardly on the plush carpet. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged her with a curt, barely perceptible nod. His voice was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. It wasn't hostile, merely absent of feeling. "I trust Mrs. Davenport has provided you with all necessary protocols and expectations?" "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Abby replied, scrambling to her feet quickly, smoothing down her simple navy dress, acutely aware of her own comparative insignificance in his imposing presence. "Good," he stated. His gaze drifted towards his children again, but it was a fleeting, impersonal glance like inspecting inventory. "Lily. Noah." His tone held no affection, only quiet command. "Mind your manners with Miss Hayes." He didn't wait for a response, didn't offer Abby any further words of welcome or instruction. With another brief, dismissive nod that encompassed the entire room, he turned on his heel and walked away, his expensive leather shoes making almost no sound on the thick carpets of the vast, silent corridor. He hadn't been in the room for more than 30 seconds. The emptiness he left behind felt colder than his presence. Abby looked back at the children. Lily was now glaring holes into the doorway where her father had disappeared, her small hands clenched into fists. Noah had curled into an even tighter ball, his shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly, still hiding his face in Captain Cuddles. Abby took a deep, steadying breath, her earlier resolve solidifying. This wasn't just about earning tuition money anymore. These children were drowning in grief and neglect, living in a gilded cage with a father who seemed incapable of reaching them. The challenge felt overwhelming, the emotional stakes terrifyingly high. But looking at Lily's fierce resentment and Noah's silent fear, Abby knew she couldn't just walk away. She wouldn't be nanny number 4 who didn't stay. For better or worse, she was here now. She had to try to reach them. She had to try to bring some light back into this beautiful, lonely house. The initial weeks at Blackwood Manor unfolded for Abby Hayes with the disorienting quality of a dream, merging into a meticulously structured, emotionally desolate reality. The sheer scale of the place continued to awe and intimidate her. Corridors stretched into seeming infinity, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her, their silence echoing her own footfalls on the polished parquet floors or plush, sound-absorbing carpets. Dust motes danced in the occasional shafts of sunlight, piercing the tall, mullioned windows, illuminating rooms filled with priceless antiques that felt untouched, unlived in. It was less a home than a curated museum, beautiful and cold, maintained with flawless precision by a minimal, almost invisible staff who moved like wraiths, adhering to the same code of unobtrusiveness expected of Abby, her primary point of human contact besides the children remained Mrs. Eleanor Davenport. The estate manager was the embodiment of starched efficiency, her posture rigid, her steel-grey hair always immaculate, her communication style clipped and purely functional. Abby learned quickly that Mrs. Davenport valued adherence to protocol above all else. Mornings began with a brief formal check-in where Mrs. Davenport would review the children's schedules for the day, issue any specific directives from Mr. Blackwood, relayed always in the third person. "Mr. Blackwood requires..." Noah's nap time to be strictly observed. Mr. Blackwood noted an unapproved application on the nursery tablet. Please remove it. And occasionally offer a terse observation disguised as feedback. Miss Hayes' punctuality at mealtimes is paramount for maintaining household rhythm. There was no room for small talk, no flicker of personal interest. Abby found herself constantly on edge around the older woman, terrified of making a misstep that would breach the complex web of unspoken rules. Yet, she also sensed, beneath the icy exterior, a fierce, almost dragon-like protectiveness towards the Blackwood family, or perhaps just towards its master. Adapting to the children's tightly packed schedule was demanding. Abby became a master of transitions, navigating the shift from Mandarin lessons with the severe Madame Dubois to violin practice with the perpetually sighing Mr. Abernathy, then to outdoor time, where Lily would often refuse to leave the immediate vicinity of the house, and Noah would cling tightly to Abby's hand, flinching at the sound of a distant lawnmower. Meals were a particular source of tension. Lily, wielding her lactose intolerance like a weapon, would often declare the specially prepared dairy-free options disgusting, while Noah would push food around his plate, eating bird-like portions, his anxiety seemingly suppressing his appetite. Abby employed every trick she knew, cutting food into fun shapes, inventing stories about the vegetables, offering quiet praise for every bite taken, but progress was measured in frustratingly small victories. Lily remained Abby's most vocal antagonist. The little girl possessed a sharp, probing intelligence that she used to test Abby's boundaries constantly. One afternoon, during the allotted free play hour in the intimidatingly tidy playroom, Abby suggested they build with a large set of magnetic tiles. "No," Lily declared, immediately crossing her arms. "That's boring. I want to use the tablet." "Tablet time isn't scheduled until after dinner, Lily. You know that," Abby reminded her gently. "How about we build a giant castle with these tiles? We could make towers and bridges. Tablets are better." "Tiffany let me use the tablet whenever I wanted," Lily countered, naming nanny number 2 with deliberate provocation. "Well, Tiffany isn't the nanny here anymore, I am," Abby said, keeping her voice even, refusing to take the bait. "And the rule is tablet time after dinner. But," she added, kneeling down beside the box of colorful tiles, "I bet we could build a castle big enough for Captain Cuddles to live in. What do you think, Noah?" Noah, sitting nearby with his bear, offered no response, but his eyes flickered towards the brightly colored tiles. Lily watched Abby, her expression calculating. Seeing Abby begin to connect pieces, building a wobbly, while Lily let out an exasperated sigh. "Not like that. The base needs to be wider, obviously." She marched over, grabbed several large square tiles, and began assembling a foundation with surprising architectural focus. For the next 30 minutes, they built in a state of tense collaboration, Lily issuing sharp commands. "No, the blue one goes there." Abby following meekly, and Noah silently adding occasional pieces to the lower levels. It wasn't warm, it wasn't fuzzy, but it was engagement. It was a start. Noah, meanwhile, presented a different, heartbreaking challenge. His silence was profound, his small body perpetually radiating anxiety. Abby learned his triggers, sudden loud noises, unfamiliar faces. Even the tutors seemed to cause him stress, any deviation from the schedule. Captain Cuddles was more than a toy. He was an emotional support necessity, clutched tightly during lessons, meals, and especially at bedtime. Abby focused on creating a bubble of safety and predictability around him. She spoke to him constantly in a soft, low voice, narrating their actions, commenting on the world around them, never demanding a verbal response. She learned the specific way he liked his blanket tucked at night, the exact spot in the garden, where he felt comfortable sitting, the quiet hum of a particular lullaby, not the one from the music box, she noted, that sometimes seemed to soothe him when he was on the verge of tears. Her patience yielded its first tiny reward, one crisp afternoon, during outdoor time. They were examining fallen autumn leaves near an ancient oak tree at the edge of the permitted garden zone. Abby picked up a vibrant red maple leaf. "Look, Noah. Isn't this beautiful? So red." Noah, holding her hand tightly, looked down at the leaf. He reached out a hesitant finger and touched its surface. "Ruh," he breathed, the sound barely louder than the rustle of the leaves underfoot. His eyes darted up to Abby's face for a fraction of a second, wide and startled, as if surprised by his own voice, before quickly looking away again. Abby's heart soared. She kept her reaction outwardly calm, not wanting to overwhelm him. "Red," she affirmed softly, smiling warmly at the leaf. "Yes, Noah, it's a very bright red. Good job noticing." She picked up a yellow leaf. "And look at this one." "This one?" Noah remained silent, but he didn't pull away. He kept looking at the leaves in her hand, his small brow furrowed in concentration. It was a minuscule step, but it felt like traversing a continent. He had made a sound intentionally, and had even made fleeting eye contact. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to feel safe enough to emerge, however tentatively, from his shell. Despite these small victories with the children, Abby's own sense of isolation deepened. The manor, beautiful as it was, felt like an elaborate, soundproofed box. Days were structured and busy, but evenings and her limited time off were achingly empty. She ate her meals alone in her room or in the quiet staff dining area, rarely encountering other staff members who seemed to operate on different schedules or simply kept to themselves. Her room, though comfortable, lacked any personal touches, besides a few photos from home taped inside her closet door hidden away. She missed the easy chaos of her student apartment, the shared meals of cheap pasta, the late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and camaraderie, phone calls and video. Chats with friends and family felt increasingly like reports from a foreign country. She tried to sound upbeat, describing the beautiful gardens or the children's progress in vague terms, carefully omitting the oppressive atmosphere, the children's deep-seated issues, the invisible presence of their enigmatic father, and, of course, the true circumstances of her employment. "Wow, Abby, it sounds like you landed on your feet," her friend Sarah exclaimed during one call. "Living the high life." "It's certainly different," Abby replied, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. "Keeps me busy." She quickly changed the subject, asking about campus gossip, feeling a sharp pang of longing for the normal, mundane problems of her old life. Hanging up, the silence of her room would rush back in, amplifying her loneliness. Was she doing the right thing? Was this isolation, this constant vigilance, worth the financial security it provided for her future? The answer always came back to Chloe. Yes, it had to be worth it, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Her curiosity about the late Ilara Blackwood, the woman whose absence seemed to define the household, intensified. Abby found herself searching for clues, not out of morbid curiosity, but from a growing need to understand the source of the family's pain, particularly Damien's impenetrable reserve and the children's deep-seated trauma. The house, however, guarded its secrets well. There were no casual photos on display, no mementos left carelessly behind. It was as if Ilara's vibrant presence, hinted at by the music box portrait, had been deliberately scrubbed from the manor's daily life. Driven by this need to understand, Abby cautiously revisited the library storage closet one quiet evening when she knew Mrs. Davenport had left for the night. Heart pounding, feeling both guilty and determined, she retrieved the tarnished silver music box. Back in her room, the door locked. She opened it. The gentle, melancholic lullaby filled the silence. She studied the miniature portrait again, the warm brown eyes, the radiant smile. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? She carefully unfolded the tiny note again. "My dearest Dee, even the longest night ends. Hold on to the light. Forever yours, Ilara." The words felt both hopeful and ominous. What long night was Ilara referring to? Had she been ill, depressed, or was it a message about something else entirely? The questions swirled, unanswered. Carefully, Abby replaced the note and returned the music box to its hiding place, the mystery only deepening. Damien Blackwood remained a ghost in his own home, a fleeting presence glimpsed down long corridors or heard as muffled voices from behind his study door. Abby learned to anticipate his movements, ensuring the children were occupied elsewhere, maintaining the invisible efficiency Mrs. Davenport prized. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of her, of the subtle changes happening, with his children, however small. One crisp Saturday morning, Abby took the children to a secluded part of the garden where a small, slightly neglected stone fountain stood amidst overgrown rose bushes, an area slightly outside the usual approved zone, but Abby felt the children needed a change of scenery. Lily, surprisingly, seemed intrigued by the old fountain, tracing the mossy carvings, while Noah, holding Abby's hand, watched a small frog sunning itself on the stone edge. It was a moment of relative peace, almost normalcy. Suddenly Noah pointed, a small finger towards the frog. "Frog," he whispered, his voice soft but clear. Abby knelt beside him instantly, her heart doing a joyful flip. Frog, yes, Noah. You saw the little frog, isn't he cute?" Noah nodded solemnly, his eyes fixed on the creature. Lily, hearing Noah speak, even just one word, momentarily forgot her sulkiness and peered closer. "He's bumpy." "He is bumpy," Abby agreed, smiling. "That's how Frogskin is." As she was talking quietly to the children about the frog, she sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a familiar prickle of awareness. Looking up towards the house, she saw him. Damien Blackwood stood on the stone terrace outside his study, partially obscured by a large urn, watching them. He wasn't scowling, wasn't smiling. His face was utterly neutral, but his gaze was fixed intently on his children, particularly on Noah, pointing at the frog. How long had he been standing there? Had he heard Noah speak? As soon as their eyes met, Damien turned abruptly and disappeared back inside, leaving Abby with a racing heart. Had she overstepped by bringing the children here? Would he reprimand her later via Mrs. Davenport? Or was it possible, was it just possible, that he had witnessed that tiny moment of progress with Noah, that flicker of connection in the neglected garden? The ambiguity of his presence, his reactions, or lack thereof, was maddening, adding another layer of complexity to her already precarious position. She was beginning to understand that navigating the emotional landscape of Blackwood Manor was far more challenging than simply following the rules in Mrs. Davenport's binder. It required deciphering silences, interpreting shadows, and trying to find light in the longest of nights. The fragile truce Abby had brokered with Lily and the tentative emergence of Noah's voice offered glimmers of hope, tiny points of light, in the vast shadowed expanse of Blackwood Manor. But these moments were often fleeting, quickly swallowed by the underlying tensions of the house and the ever-present weight of Abby's secret. Life continued under the rigid schedules dictated by Mrs. Davenport, punctuated by the unpredictable emotional weather patterns of the grieving children and the unnerving, infrequent appearances of their father. Abby clung to the small victories. Noah began occasionally whispering single words, mostly labels for objects, usually directed at Captain Cuddles but clearly audible to Abby. "Car," he murmured one afternoon, pointing a small finger as Damien Blackwood's sleek black sedan swept silently up the driveway. "Tree," he'd whisper in the garden, touching the rough bark of an oak. Each utterance felt like a precious gift, a sign that the walls around his silence were slowly, carefully being dismantled. Abby learned to acknowledge these words gently, without excessive praise that might startle him back into retreat. "Yes, Noah, a car, a big black car." Or, "That's right, a big tall tree." Lily remained a more complex puzzle. Her sharp intelligence meant she saw through any hint of condescension, and her grief often manifested as anger, directed squarely at Abby as the most convenient target. Yet there were moments when the fierce defenses wavered. One rainy evening, curled up on the window seat in the nursery after a particularly difficult day, Lily was unusually quiet. Abby sat nearby, pretending to read but acutely aware of the little girl's somber mood. "Mommy liked rainy days," Lily said suddenly, her voice small, directed at the rain-streaked window pane. "She said it was good weather for hot chocolate, hand-telling stories inside." Abby's heart clenched. It was the first time Lily had voluntarily mentioned her mother in weeks. "That sounds lovely, Lily," Abby replied softly, keeping her tone gentle, neutral. "Do you remember any of the stories she used to tell?" Lily shook her head, her dark ponytail swishing against her shoulders. "Not really. Just that she always made the best hot chocolate, with tiny marshmallows." A single tear escaped and tracked silently down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. It doesn't matter. She's gone. Abby's instinct was to offer comfort, a hug, but she knew Lily would likely reject it. Instead, she said quietly, "It's okay to miss her, Lily. It's okay to feel sad that she's gone. And it's okay to remember the good things like the hot chocolate." Lily didn't respond, just continued staring out at the rain, but she didn't push Abby away. They sat in shared silence for a while, the rhythm of the rain filling the space between them. It wasn't a solution, but it felt like a crack in the wall, a shared acknowledgement of the grief that permeated the house. Abby realized then that her role wasn't just about managing behavior, it was about holding space for immense pain. Pain that the children's own father seemed unable or unwilling to address. The mystery surrounding Elara Blackwood continued to tug at Abby's thoughts. The music box, the cryptic note, they hinted at a depth and perhaps a sadness that contrasted sharply with the vibrant portrait. Abby found herself scanning bookshelves during quiet moments, looking for inscriptions, examining the few impersonal, landscape paintings on the walls for hidden meanings. One afternoon, helping the elderly, stooped groundskeeper, Mr. Henderson, carry some gardening tools back to the shed, a task far outside her duties. But Mr. Henderson was one of the few staff members who offered a kind, grandfatherly smile. Abby ventured a carefully worded question. "Mr. Henderson, you've worked here a long time, haven't you?" she began casually. "Aye, Miss Hayes, longer than I care to admit," he chuckled, wiping his brow with a worn handkerchief. "Seen this place through many seasons. It's such a beautiful estate," Abby continued. "The previous Mrs. Blackwood, Elara, was it? Did she enjoy the gardens?" Mr. Henderson's smile faded instantly, his expression clouding over. He became very busy arranging his tools. "Mrs. Elara," he said gruffly, his voice low, "loved flowers, especially the white roses by the east terrace." He paused, then added curtly, avoiding Abby's eyes, "Best not to dwell on the past, miss. Some things are best left buried." He picked up a rake and shuffled away, effectively ending the conversation. His reaction confirmed Abby's suspicions. Elara's death was a subject shrouded in deliberate silence, perhaps even pain or controversy. The casual mention of her name was enough to shut down even the most benign conversation. What secrets did this household? Then came the email that sent Abby's carefully balanced world into a tailspin. The automated final warning from the university bursar's office. Tuition payment seriously overdue. Immediate payment required within 72 hours to avoid administrative withdrawal. Panic, cold and suffocating, gripped her. She had the money. The substantial paycheck from Blackwood Manor sat waiting in the account she'd opened under Eleanor Vance's name. But the timing was catastrophic. She tried logging into her bank's website, needing to initiate the transfer now. "System unavailable due to scheduled overnight maintenance. Please try again after 6 a.m. 6 a.m.? By then, the 72-hour window might have closed. Frantic thoughts raced through her head. Could she call the bursar's office first thing in the morning? Would they grant an extension? It was unlikely. Rules were rules. Could she borrow money? From whom? Her student friends were as broke as she was. Asking Mrs. Davenport for an advance was unthinkable. The only person within these walls with the immediate capability to solve this was the one person she absolutely could not ask. For hours that evening, long after the children were asleep, Abby paced her room like a caged animal. She refreshed the banking website obsessively. Still down. She checked her email, hoping for a miraculous update from the university. Nothing. The deadline loomed, threatening to snatch away the dream she had sacrificed so much for, the very reason she had taken this impossible, duplicitous job in the first place. The irony was bitter. She was living in opulent luxury, earning an incredible salary under false pretenses, yet she might lose everything due to a simple banking glitch. Just before midnight, desperation overriding caution, she found herself drawn towards the forbidden territory of Damien Blackwood's private study. She knew he often worked past midnight. A sliver of light shone from beneath the heavy oak door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane, a fireable offense at best. But the image of the withdrawal notice, the thought of telling Chloe she had to drop out, It propelled her forward. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that did little to calm her nerves, she raised a trembling hand and knocked softly on the solid wood. Silence. She knocked again, a little louder, the sound echoing unnervingly in the silent corridor. The door opened abruptly, startling her. Damien Blackwood stood there, filling the frame. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired, annoyed, and intensely intimidating. His light grey eyes narrowed instantly at the sight of her standing there, clearly distressed, well outside her permitted zone. "Miss Hayes." His voice was dangerously quiet, laced with controlled displeasure. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" The rehearsed explanation died on Abby's lips. All she could manage was the raw, unfiltered truth, tumbling out in a frantic whisper. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so incredibly sorry. I know this is wrong, but my university, the tuition payment, it's due tonight, the deadline, and my bank's website is down for maintenance. I can't transfer the funds, and they'll withdraw me from the program if it's not paid in the next few hours. I didn't know what else to do." Tears of sheer panic began to well in her eyes. Is there any possible way could I just use a computer here, a different network, just for 5 minutes? He stared at her, his expression utterly unreadable, granite-like. She expected him to slam the door, to summon Mrs. Davenport, to unleash the icy fury she sensed beneath his controlled surface. The silence stretched, amplifying the frantic pounding of her own heart. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of her desperate plea against the blatant breach of protocol. Then, to her utter astonishment, he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod and stepped aside, holding the door open just enough for her to pass. "The guest terminal is on the credenza," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth or judgment. 5 minutes, not 1 second more, and do not touch anything else." A choked sob of relief escaped Abby. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." She practically flew past him into the inner sanctum of his study. The room, glimpsed only briefly before, felt different now, charged with his presence. Leather-bound books lined the walls, a faint scent of old paper and expensive cologne hung in the air. A large abstract painting, dark and turbulent, dominated one wall. The massive desk was clear except for a sleek laptop and a single silver-framed photograph turned away from view. Forcing herself to ignore her surroundings, Abby hurried to the guest terminal, logged in with shaking fingers, navigated frantically to the university payment portal. Her breath hitched as she entered the large sum required. She clicked Submit Payment, praying it would work. A green confirmation message flashed on screen. Payment successful. Weak with relief, she quickly logged out, careful to leave no trace. She turned back towards Damien, ready to offer her profound gratitude once more. He hadn't returned to his desk. He stood near the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, watching her. His expression was still controlled, but his eyes held a sharp analytical focus that made her stomach clench with renewed fear. He had seen the amount flash on the screen. He had seen the name of the prestigious university. He knew what she earned. "An expensive education, Miss Hayes," he remarked, his voice dangerously soft, breaking the silence. "Financed through diligent saving, I presume." The question was smooth, almost casual, but the underlying skepticism was unmistakable. He knew. He might not know the how or the why of her deception, but he knew the numbers didn't add up. He knew she wasn't just a simple nanny struggling to make ends meet. Liv felt the blood drain from her face. Her throat went dry. The relief of paying tuition evaporated, replaced by the cold dread of imminent exposure. Yes, Mr. Blackwood," she stammered, the lie feeling paper-thin under his penetrating gaze. "Saving, and some family help." He didn't challenge the flimsy excuse directly. He simply pushed himself off the doorframe, his movement economical and precise. "Your 5 minutes are up," he stated coolly. "Ensure your personal financial affairs are managed more effectively in the future, so as not to necessitate such dramatic interventions." The implied warning was clear. "Close the door quietly on your way out. It was an absolute dismissal, leaving no room for further conversation or explanation. Abby mumbled a barely audible, "Yes, sir, thank you again. Good night," and fled the study, pulling the heavy door shut behind her with a trembling hand, the soft click echoing the pounding in her chest. She leaned against the cool wall of the corridor, trying to catch her breath. She had survived. She had paid the tuition. But the cost was immense. Damien Blackwood knew something was wrong. He was suspicious. He was watching her. The carefully constructed walls of her deception were riddled with cracks, and she had the terrifying feeling that the enigmatic, analytical billionaire was just beginning to piece together the truth. The relative safety of the status quo was gone. The endgame was approaching, faster than she could have imagined. The air in Blackwood Manor grew thick with unspoken tension in the days following Abby's late-night visit to Damien's study. While Damien maintained his usual cool, professional distance, Abby felt his gaze on her more often. Sharp, analytical, questioning. He hadn't directly accused her further, hadn't demanded proof of the family assistance she'd claimed, but his suspicion was a palpable presence, a low hum beneath the surface of their minimal interactions. Abby walked on eggshells, every word measured, every action calculated, terrified of making another slip, of giving him the final piece he needed to unravel her entire deception. She poured her nervous energy into caring for Lily and Noah, finding solace in their small breakthroughs. Noah was now occasionally stringing two words together, blue car, more juice, his confidence growing tentatively under Abby's patient encouragement. Lily, while still prone to bouts of sharp-edged defiance, had moments of surprising vulnerability, sometimes seeking Abby out to quietly show her a drawing or ask a question unrelated to schedules or rules. Abby cherished these fragile connections, knowing they were built on borrowed time. The breaking point came unexpectedly, not through a direct confrontation, but through a seemingly innocuous object. One afternoon, while helping the children tidy the playroom before their quiet reading time, Noah accidentally knocked over a decorative wooden box kept on a high shelf by Mrs. Davenport, a shelf Abby usually ensured was out of reach. The contents spilled across the plush rug, dried flowers, faded ribbons, and several old leather-bound diaries. Before Abby could quickly gather them, Lily, always curious, snatched one of the diaries. "What's this?" she asked, flipping it open. Despite Abby's immediate, "Lily, put that down, please, that's not ours." Lily ignored her, her eyes scanning the elegant, looping handwriting within. "It looks like Mummy's writing," she murmured, a rare softness entering her voice. Just then, Damien Blackwood appeared in the doorway, drawn perhaps by the sound of the dropped box or Lily's raised voice. He froze instantly, his gaze locking onto the open diary in Lily's hand. A look of raw, unguarded pain flashed across his face, so intense it made Abby gasp. It was immediately replaced by a mask of icy fury. "Lily!" His voice was sharp, commanding, cracking like a whip in the quiet room. "Put that down, now!" Startled by his tone, Lily dropped the diary, as if burned. Noah whimpered and hid behind Abby's legs, clutching Captain Cuddles. Damien strode into the room, his movements stiff with controlled anger. He knelt, swiftly gathering the diaries and scattered contents, his knuckles white as he shoved them back into the box. He didn't look at the children. His cold, furious gaze landed squarely on Abby. "These items," he stated, his voice dangerously low, trembling slightly with suppressed emotion, "are private. They are kept out of reach for a reason. How did this happen, Miss Hayes?" I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood," Abby stammered, feeling responsible even though it was an accident. Noah knocked the box over while reaching for a puzzle. "I didn't realize Lily had grabbed one until—" "Your responsibility is to supervise," he cut her off coldly, "to ensure boundaries are maintained. Clearly you are failing in that duty." He stood up, clutching the box protectively. He looked down at Lily, whose face had crumpled, tears welling in her eyes at his harsh tone. "Go to your room, Lily, both of you," he added, his gaze flicking briefly towards Noah, still hidden behind Abby. Lily burst into tears and ran from the room. Noah trembled violently but didn't move. "I said go," Damien repeated, his voice tighter. Abby instinctively put a protective hand on Noah's small shoulder. "Mr. Blackwood, please," she began softly. He's frightened. It was just an accident. Do not presume to tell me how to handle my children, Miss Hayes, Damien snapped, his control finally breaking, revealing the raw grief and anger beneath. You know nothing about this family. Nothing about our loss, nothing about... He stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. He looked from the box containing the diaries to Abby's face, and suddenly, the suspicion she'd seen in his eyes after the tuition incident coalesced with the raw emotion of this moment. The pieces clicked into place for him, illuminated by the stark light of his own pain. Miss Hayes, he began again, his voice dangerously quiet now, the earlier fury replaced by a chilling certainty. Or should I say, Miss Cartwright? Abby froze, the blood draining from her face. He knew. Somehow, between her financial discrepancy and this accidental unearthing of his late wife's diaries, he had put it all together. There was no point denying it further. How? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Discrepancies, he said flatly. The tuition payment inconsistent with your stated background, your occasional slips in demeanor, your answers during the interview that hinted at depths Eleanor Vance's record never reflected. He gestured towards the box he held, and perhaps an intuition sharpened by grief, recognizing that the calculated efficiency I thought I hired was subtly undermined by a level of empathy, an empathy Ilara possessed. He looked directly at her, his grey eyes filled with a mixture of cold anger and weary resignation. I made inquiries after the tuition incident. It wasn't difficult to confirm that the real Eleanor Vance accepted a position in London weeks ago, which left the question, who has been impersonating her in my home, caring for my children? The full weight of discovery crashed down on Abby. She couldn't speak, could only stand there, trembling, tears blurring her vision. Why? Damien demanded, his voice low, intense. Why the elaborate deception? Taking a shaky breath, Abby repeated the story she'd told him partially in his study, but this time with the full weight of her imminent exposure. My sister, Chloe, the leukemia, the transplant cost. I saw the email, the salary. I was desperate, Mr. Blackwood, utterly desperate. I know it was wrong, unforgivable, but I felt I had no other choice. He listened again, his expression unreadable. The raw anger seemed to have subsided slightly, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked down at the box containing Ilara's diaries. Desperation, he murmured, almost to himself. Yes, I suppose I understand desperation. He looked back at Abby, then at Noah, still trembling behind her. He sighed, a deep, ragged sound. Ilara, my wife. She didn't die in a simple accident. His voice was low, strained. She battled severe postpartum depression after Noah was born. It was a long, difficult struggle. We tried everything, therapy, medication, but the darkness, it consumed her. He paused, swallowing hard. She took her own life, Miss Hayes, here in this house. The confession hung in the air, heavy and devastating. Abby gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Suicide? That was the tragic circumstance, the source of the suffocating silence, the reason for Damien's icy reserve, Lily's anger, Noah's traumatized silence. The children, Damien continued, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze distant, lost in painful memory. Lily found her. Noah was in the room. They were so young. He closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of agony crossing his features. I shut down. I focused on work, on control, on schedules. Anything to avoid facing the reality, the grief. I thought protecting them meant shielding them, keeping everything locked away. He glanced at the box of diaries, including her words. He looked back at Abby, his eyes holding a new, raw vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Your deception was wrong, Miss Cartwright, deeply wrong. A violation of trust I cannot easily overlook. He paused. But your presence here, despite the lies, I have seen changes in my children. Small changes, yes, but Noah speaking again? Lily engaging, even through defiance? That hasn't happened with the others. He seemed to be thinking aloud, grappling with conflicting truths. I care about them, Mr. Blackwood, Abby whispered sincerely, tears streaming down her face now, tears for Ilara, for the children, for Damien, for her own complicated situation. Truly. Beneath the lie, that part was always real. Damien regarded her for a long moment, the silence stretching. Finally, he made a decision. "Go to the children, Miss Cartwright," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Comfort Noah. I need some time." He turned, clutching the box of diaries, and walked out of the playroom, leaving Abby alone with the echoes of his devastating confession and the uncertain future. Abby didn't know what to expect. Termination seemed inevitable, perhaps even legal action despite his moment of vulnerability. But the days passed, and nothing happened. Damien remained distant, but the icy wall seemed fractionally lower. He didn't mention her deception again, nor did he ask her to leave. An uneasy, unspoken truce settled over the manor. Slowly, cautiously, Damien began to change. He started making brief appearances at the children's dinner time, sitting silently at the table observing. He began reading the diaries, Abby sometimes glimpsing him late at night in his study, the small lamp illuminating his pained expression. He even, hesitantly at first, began trying to connect with his children, guided perhaps by Ilara's written words or Abby's quiet example. He'd ask Lily a simple question about her painting, or sit near Noah, just being present without demanding. Interaction. Abby continued her work, her position undefined, her future uncertain. Her focus remained on Lily and Noah, who blossomed under the combined, albeit awkward, attention. Noah began speaking more, forming short sentences. Lily's anger softened, occasionally replaced by genuine questions or shared laughter. One evening, months later, Damien found Abby sitting in the garden after the children were asleep watching the fireflies. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a comfortable distance. "Chloe is doing well, I understand," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. His network likely kept him informed. "Yes," Abby replied softly. "The transplant was successful. She's in remission, starting art classes again soon." "Good," he murmured. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance. "Miss Cartwright." "Abby," he began, turning slightly towards her. "What you did, coming here under false pretenses, was wrong. But perhaps," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "perhaps it was the catalyst this broken house needed. You brought light back." He echoed Ilara's words from the note. "You saved my sister's life, Mr. Blackwood," Abby whispered. "Your donation." He cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "Money is easy, Abby. Connection, that's harder. You showed my children connection again. You showed me—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to articulate the rest. "I need to make things right," Abby said, turning to face him fully. "I can't keep working here under these terms. The money is irrelevant," he stated firmly. "What is relevant is the children's well-being. They need stability. They need you." He hesitated. "I need you, as their nanny. If you'd be willing to stay, properly this time, as Abigail Hayes." Abby looked at him, truly looked at him. The ice around his eyes had thawed, revealing the deep sadness, but also a flicker of hope. She looked towards the house, where Lily and Noah slept, finally feeling safer. Her own path was clear now, too. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "I'd like that very much." It wasn't a fairy tale ending, not yet. There were scars, deep wounds that needed time and patience to heal. But sitting there in the twilight, watching the fireflies, Abby felt a sense of peace. The deception was over. The truth was out. And maybe, just maybe, this broken billionaire, his wounded children, and the accidental nanny could find a way to build a future together, holding on to the light. Abby and Damien's story shows us that grief can isolate, but vulnerability and unexpected connections can lead to healing. If this journey of loss, secrets, and second chances touched your soul, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that explore the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for being here.